Welcome back to the show. Today we have Bryan Tuk. He's an attorney, author, and musician. Bryan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you kind of back on the show. You've done a ton of stuff, and it's quite fascinating to me anyway. So maybe before we get into all that fun stuff, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure thing. I grew up and still live in the Philadelphia suburbs
Okay.
in Pennsylvania.
Very cool. So you went to university to become a lawyer. Do you want to walk me through your childhood, kind of deciding to go to law school and then actually going to law school?
Well, sure. My undergrad degree, which I got at Westchester University, which is also here in Pennsylvania,
Sure.
was in business management.
Okay.
Initially, had a little bit of an indirect route to where I am now. I was a music major originally, decided that was not necessarily where I wanted to go professionally in terms of becoming a teacher. And was out in the workforce for a couple of years and just really felt, quite frankly, just not challenged. It wasn't hard enough.
Sure.
Had a job at a Fortune 500 company, sitting in a cubicle and processing, reports, basically, is what it boiled down to.
Sure.
And a friend of mine had the entrance exam for law schools in the U.S. is called the LSAT, the Law School Admissions Test, or the Aptitude Test, rather, excuse me. And she had a practice book, with just sample questions and the layout of the exam and how that all worked. And I started leafing through that one day and thought, well, geez, these questions make sense to me the way I think in terms of problem solving and how you process and analyze information. So I kind of started just taking the quizzes just out of curiosity to see if I could do it.
Interesting.
One thing led to another, and I was admitted to Temple University School of Law in North Philly and graduated there in 2000 with my Juris Doctor.
Very cool. But you're still an active musician. Obviously, you're a practicing lawyer.
Yep.
And you recently wrote a book for kind of startups. So walk me through kind of a bit of your journey from actually, being a practicing lawyer to actually working with kind of startups and then writing a book about it.
Sure. Well, I'm in my 19th year in
Wow.
private practice.
Congrats. That's great, man.
It's going quick. And I've been a transactional lawyer mostly my entire career. So I help people put deals together.
Okay.
I help people start companies in some cases. Sometimes it's private placement of private securities. If it's not a company that's going to be publicly listed. And dealing with all those shareholders issues and organizational issues over that period of time, you start to see trends emerge.
Sure.
Startup companies tend to have the same kinds of questions, and running in a parallel track. As you said, have been a musician since I was 10 years old.
That's great.
And keeping that part of my self alive, I started helping arts organizations. Sometimes they could be community symphony orchestras or theater companies or art museums, for example, and also what I call creators, filmmakers, musicians, photographers, videographers, digital marketing companies and digital agencies. And a lot of that kind of works had all of the traits that my startup practice had in terms of getting companies organized, shareholders agreements,
Sure.
Voting rights, who's going to do what, helping them navigate commercial leases and commercial loans in some cases. And again, in this other subset of the business world, which I think it is music and film and video gaming, which is probably a totally different conversation.
Sure.
Are massive industries.
Yep.
Unto themselves. Looking at that subset of my client base, and what I'd call the traditional startup that might be in healthcare or in real estate development and management or construction, for example, those questions existed in both populations.
Interesting. Sure.
So that's what led to the book. And here, I'll just hold it up because
sure.
I am not afraid to use a prop in one of these. But it's called Risk, Create, Change. I published it in March of this year. And it is a rundown of those 8 or 9 basic things you need to know when you're starting at square one.
Sure.
So how to get organized, should you form an LLC, should you form a corporation, how to surround yourself with talent in terms of whether it's just a board of advisors that might be experienced business people from different disciplines that can help you on your way, whether it's in terms of product strategy or identifying your ideal customer, figuring out what your value proposition is, that kind of stuff. And then there's some other things in the book that deal with securities laws, how to raise money, what crowdfunding is, how to write a business plan, what an ideal pitch deck is supposed to look like.
Sure.
I taught also at the university level. I teach courses for startups and entrepreneurs. So a lot of the material comes right out of the syllabus from the college courses that I've taught.
No, that's very cool. And I think the thing that's interesting about kind of what you're doing is, obviously you're a lawyer, so giving advice about what to set up. I think I would put myself in this boat, is when it comes to the legal side of kind of a company, I'm just like, I really have no idea, right? I've had to kind of reach out to people like yourself and accountants and all that stuff to say, like, okay, what do I need to do? Because, and so I think a lot of people are in the same boat as me, right? They have this business, or they want to create something, and they want to make sure that they're all kind of covered, but they don't really know where to start. So I think from an attorney writing a book about a startup, it's kind of an interesting approach to things, right? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that, or what to do.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head. Not knowing where to start. So startups have kind of one big hurdle is the fear of what other people are going to think.
Sure.
Especially if you're leaving a stable job. You have a 9-to-5 job, but you really want to become a graphic novelist, let's say, which there is a market for that, and people do make livings.
Yep.
Or you want to open, or you're a great graphic illustrator, and you want to open a tattoo business, which there are many tattoo artists running around making 6 figures that
Sure.
you would never suspect.
Yep.
So the fear of what people are going to think, why would you leave a secure or supposedly secure situation to go out on your own? There's that hurdle. And then the unknown is the other hurdle, not knowing what you don't know, which is the most dangerous place to be in, whether you're in the legal world or in the business world. So what the book is about is giving people enough information so that they can spot issues. At least you're armed with the ability to know, like, I don't know the answer about this, but I know we need an operating agreement or a shareholders agreement. Let's find somebody who does that.
Sure.
That kind of thing. So really it's designed to take away that unknown problem from this process. And then the startup process, or the process of launching a new business, gets a bit easier.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's tricky because, like, if, say, me and you were, say you're not a lawyer for a second here, and like, if me and you just come up with a little app idea and we're deciding, like, okay, neither one of us is going to quit our full-time job. You're going to do this piece, I'm going to do this piece, and let's just build this thing kind of in the evenings and weekends, and then, maybe in a few months we'll launch this thing and see what happens, right? What type of kind of agreement, if any, should we kind of have at that point?
Well, if this is something that you're, working out of your, sort of the old Parable was, they're working out of their garage. They're
Sure.
building a better, building a better computer chip in the garage. If you're at that stage,
Yeah.
A handshake deal is always dangerous. In other words,
Sure.
a verbal agreement that you and I are going to be 50-50 partners.
Sure.
Great. The problem is nobody remembers that conversation. If the product or service takes off,
Yep.
no one remembers what the original deal was.
Yep.
So even if it's a very basic memorandum of understanding that's one page with 5 bullet points, we are going to build product X, whatever it is. I'm going to handle marketing. You're going to handle the technical side of things, for example.
Sure.
We agree that we will be 50-50 partners, and we're going to do a shareholders agreement at some point in the future. We both sign it, and then at least there is something to try to enforce later.
Sure.
Because a lot of times people come to me and they're not ready.
Yeah.
They're in the exact stage you just described, where the cost of getting organized, maybe they're not ready for that yet. However, as soon as things start to progress, let's form an LLC.
Okay.
Let's form a corporation. It's fairly cheap and easy to do in every state in the U.S. I can't speak to Canada.
Sure.
But
yeah, it's pretty inexpensive, but yeah.
Our legal systems both derive from England, so
Sure.
It's fairly similar. But form a corporation and then hire an attorney to do a short operating agreement or shareholders agreement. And when you are dealing with attorneys, a lot of them are still in the 1800s business model.
Sure.
Meaning you're going to pay me by the hour. It's going to be a substantial number, probably, and I can't tell you when we're done, which you'd never buy a product or service in any other sector.
Sure.
Maybe medicine, for example, where the customer, the patient doesn't know all the things to get out. But, what I try to do is operate on a retail model.
Okay.
People come to me with a project. I give them, I ask as much information as they can give me. I give them a written proposal with a fixed price.
Interesting.
They pay 50% up front. When the work product is delivered, they pay the balance. And then they've got some cost containment. They don't have to worry about picking the phone up. When you have attorneys that are working on an hourly basis, every time you email them or call them, the meter's running.
Yeah. They charge you for the staples even.
Yeah. Well, and that has the effect of preventing people from calling you.
Yeah.
I want people to contact me.
Sure.
So using the retail model, it took me a little while to figure out the ins and outs of that, but now that I've done that, it's working really much better than I could have ever hoped. So
yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that's part of the problem. I think even I put myself in this boat where, I built stuff with my, a friend of mine, and chances are it usually goes nowhere, but we've never kind of had an agreement in place because we're always so worried about, like, well, there's no point even spending a few $100s on this thing, right? Or we don't want to get a bill for like $3,000, and you're like, it never even went live, right? So I think what you just said is really good advice. You come up with like a one-page thing that's quick. If it actually sees the light of day, then maybe you actually, move it into a proper agreement with, like a lawyer like yourself, and then you kind of add as you need, right? Instead of this big thing out of the gate, you drop $10,000 and then it never goes live, right?
Right. I mean, you certainly want to determine whether the product has legs.
Sure.
Whether there's, you think there might be a market for it, but until you get feedback from your test, your focus groups or your test customers, you don't really know what you have.
Sure.
And the trick again is to formalize things before they really take off.
Sure.
Because once it takes off, you're going to be busy with scaling it up, marketing. You may have manufacturers agreements if it's a physical product to deal with, and the project gets very busy very quickly.
Sure.
So definitely get your legal structure in place before you try to scale anything, because it can get messy very, very quickly if you don't.
Sure. So you're kind of a big thought leader on kind of copyright, and I think it's kind of a good point to maybe cover right now about kind of protecting your copyright, whether it's physical, digital, a bit of both. How does that kind of work from your side of things, and how can I kind of protect my copyright?
Well, sure. So the trend that we're experiencing, not only in the business world but in life, is that everything in our experience is transitioning into the digital world.
Sure.
Whether it's newspapers that exist online, or television, everything comes out of your phone now.
Yeah.
That trend has made it very easy for people to infringe on trademarks and copyrights. So basically, copyrights, for those who don't know, there's a law in the United States and in every industrialized country, for the most part, that will give you a legally protectable right in a creative property. So copyright covers film, screenplays, novels, music, things of that nature. Now, trademarks are for branding, logos, catchphrases that brands use, like Nike's "Just Do It," for example. That's a bit of an older example, but
sure,
you get the idea. So trademarks handle branding, copyrights cover creative properties, and we are making, I think, fewer and fewer things, right? Like, you don't see somebody growing up now who wants to build a better mousetrap, a better physical product. You get people that want to build video games, they want to build apps, they want to go into software, which is great. They want to go into artificial intelligence, perhaps, which is necessary, and that's the way our economy is evolving. And as a result, it becomes more and more important to be able to protect your intellectual property. So basically, in a very short tour here, there are two offices. The Copyright Office is in Washington, D.C.
Right.
That handles copyright registration. And the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office handles patents and trademarks. Patents are a totally different animal, which we'll leave to the side for now.
Sure.
In order to really to have all of the, the muscularity of federal law in the U.S. behind you, you have to register your works. It's not hard to do. It's not really that expensive to do. But in order to be able to stop people from infringing on your book, your whatever it is,
sure,
your property, you need to take some steps, some basic steps to register your works with those offices.
Sure.
And I'll tell you, for an example, the people that get really have a hard time with enforcement are photographers.
Sure.
So professional photographers, especially on Instagram, you see a lot of people taking a screenshot of a picture that they like of some, like, let's say it's of, pick somebody, Lionel Messi or some famous athlete.
Sure.
But the photograph is owned by the photographer.
Yep.
And when I take a screenshot of that and I repost it on my Instagram feed, I have infringed on that photographer's copyright.
Sure.
As a result, I think a lot of photographers are in the same boat of the other startups, thinking, well, it's too expensive. It's how will I protect myself? How will I protect my livelihood? Well, the fact of the matter is the Copyright Act has significant penalties, both actual damages and what are called statutory damages, where the penalties accumulate very quickly. It's very pro-plaintiff.
Okay, interesting.
And think about your livelihood being in such a precarious position where anyone can just take your goods or services without paying for them.
Sure.
and you may never even know it happened.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky world out there, and I think creators are learning to navigate it. But certainly registration of your work is important, and software code can also be copyrighted.
Interesting.
And often is in large gaming properties.
Sure.
So it has copyright really and trademark really cover, the entire, economy.
Sure.
All industry sectors have some contact with that type of law.
Sure. So how does it work though? In your photography example, like I create something, or like I took this photograph, and then somebody else is taking credit for that photograph, and maybe I've never filed any copyright or anything, and then maybe eventually can I go after that person if I choose to, legally at some point, or do I need to kind of backdate my stuff, or how does it kind of work if I have nothing set up right now, but I might choose in the future to actually go after that person?
Sure. Well, the thing I would recommend to you, so let's do a real world example. Okay. Let's say the Philadelphia Eagles just won the Super Bowl this year. So let's say I'm a photographer, I'm standing in the end zone, and when Nick Foles catches that touchdown pass that nobody expects, for some reason I'm in the perfect position to shoot that shot. I'm the only one. Sports Illustrated wants it, the New York Times wants it, Wall Street Journal. So if people are approaching me, quickly I would go to copyright.gov.gov. That's the website for the Copyright Office. I would register the photograph. It's $55. It's not even that expensive to do. Then I can license the picture to whatever news publications, Getty Images or whomever. Now, in your example, let's say I haven't done that. Mm-hmm. And I have this picture and I notice somebody else, it appears in the New York Post or the Los Angeles Times or someplace.
Yeah.
What I do is I register the photograph first.
Okay.
And then subsequent to that, then I send a cease and desist letter to whatever publication that is, letting them know that my registration number with the Copyright Office is, whatever the number is.
Sure.
From that point forward, what they do becomes really important. If they continue to publish it or they don't take it down, then you've got infringement, and you've got the Copyright Act behind you.
Got you.
To give you access to attorney's fees and statutory penalties and all of that.
Sure.
But definitely protecting your work is essential to being able to enforce your rights on a national basis or on a worldwide basis, because there are international treaties that deal with that exact issue.
Got you. Yeah, and I think sometimes those big newspapers don't even know that they're infringing, right? Like they found a photo, somebody said it was theirs, but it's really not theirs, right? Like I think sometimes stuff gets published and they don't even know, right?
Well, I think in the print editions that's less likely to happen, but in the online versions,
that makes sense. Yeah,
there are stories being filed every minute of every day by, the volume of content that news organizations put out nowadays is astonishing.
Sure.
It's probably easier for something to slip through their controls online versus in print.
Sure.
But if it does exist online, it's good for the photographer because it's easier to discover.
Yeah.
You don't need to be in the physical circulation area of that publication to find out about it.
Sure.
And you can do something about it.
No, I think that's really good advice. But Bryan, we're out of time, so let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and the book and anything else you want to mention.
Oh, well, thank you. You can find me. I'm on all of the majors: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. The handle is @Tuk Law Offices. And the book, which I will Yeah, we should
Hold
have
it
a
up
little
in front of you
insight.
just to make sure it's good. Yeah.
There we go. It's called Risk, Create, Change, a survival guide for startups and creators. It's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback editions. And there's also a dedicated website for the book. There's a blog there that has startup issues and some content there that might be of interest. You can go to riskcreatechange.com for that. And, really thank you, Kevin, for the opportunity to speak with your audience today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks again for doing it. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.